Good morning, everyone, and here we are at Top Secret Malagasy HQ of Fighter Command HQ. And what I'm busy doing is actually planning all of the aircraft squadrons and planning their camouflage schemes and planning whether they are omni-role, multi-role, or specifically dedicated to a mission such as strike mission. Obviously you can see my son's busy building a Sonic Lego, but here we go. So when you sort of think about planning an air force, it gets really complex, and there's a strategic change which I need to cover, which I'll cover in another video. But basically there is going to be forward basing of aircraft in Oilem. I've listened to some of the feedback from viewers, and the Malagasy Armed Forces cannot let Oilem collapse or fall. There's a lot of problems going on in Africa at the minute, and they need to be ready to act if there is a war. Hopefully the deterrence aspect will avoid it. So when you start to look at the aircraft, and we've got 90 Gripens, which seems like a lot. We've got 36 Mantellas, we've got 54 J10s, and it seems like a lot of aircraft, but actually when you factor in that you've got to have remote basing at Reunion Island, the Kerguelen Islands, the Comoros Islands, forward basing in Oilem, which is where Mozambique actually is. Very quickly the force dissipates, and you end up with lots of gaps in the coverage, so you have to plan it quite carefully. The other thing is some aircraft, like the FC-31, is a multi-role aircraft. It can do strike and it can do air combat. However, other aircraft like the EF-15G is a specific jamming aircraft. That's its purpose and that's what it's brought for. It does do air combat, but only as a secondary last sort of resort. Other aircraft like the F-16 capable of both, but again, this has been purchased for the seed killer role. So you wouldn't want to have lots of squadrons dedicated to omni role, because whilst you could have, say, a Hawk with a secondary air combat role, actually its main role is putting rockets and munitions down range to support ground troops. The same with the Mirage. The Mirage, whilst it can do air combat as a secondary role, is not as good as, say, a long-range specific fighter like the Su-30. So first of all, you want to play your aircraft to their strengths, a bit like the F-44 Mantella, which can deliver small diameter bombs, but its main role is air dominance. So when you look at it that way, you start to have specific aircraft or specific types that you would use for different roles, and that does make sense, because whilst aircraft like the Gripen are probably the most flexible, if you think about sort of personnel and what you're doing, is if you had a Gripen squadron that had to do everything, so this one's set up for anti-ship, and it had to do strike, and it had to do air combat, other than sort of your baseline skills, if you start then loading stuff onto that, you very quickly end up with sort of a jack of all trades, master of none situation. So even within the Gripens, which are really omni-role aircraft, it's better to have sort of specializations. So for example, the Charmander squadron is a strike specialist. Certainly it carries meteors and it does air combat, but it's a strike specialist squadron, and that makes sense as well from a personnel perspective, because even within an organization, you want some skills to be honed and maintained. So if you have everyone doing everything, you'll get that base level of proficiency, but you won't necessarily get the operational skill set that you need. And also it gets very boring for the crews, because actually there's no career progression within the organisation. So what I've been doing is really looking at, okay, well, where are the aircraft going to be based? And we've got three main sectors: Northern, Western, Eastern and Reunion. And Western now includes the Malagasy Expeditionary Force. And within those areas, you want to have a good range of say anti-ship specialists, which will be in the blue and blue scheme. You want to have strike specialists, which will be in the tritone, and then some air-to-air or flex specialists, which will be in the overall grey. So that's what I'm doing, and it's good for the personnel because personnel can spend some time on the flex squadrons, and then they can, if they want to specialise in anti-ship for their career development, they can do a bit of that on the anti-ship squadrons, or if they want to be strike specialists, they can do that, and that's a good route then into bomber command, career pipelines and stuff like that. What it also does is it gives a cadre of specialists. So say if you lost a few air crews in a flex squadron, where you've got that cadre of knowledge that is in the strike squadrons that can then come across and support the wings. So it's a more flexible way of doing it. And then you start to put aircraft in wings. So Western and Malagasy Expeditionary Force, we've got 2 strike squadrons, the Charmander Squadron, we've got the Wooper Squadron, and we've got the Mankey. These are all Pokemon names. And so that gives you what you need to support that Malagasy Expeditionary Force. So you've still got the ability to take on other aircraft and threats with the Meteors, but you've got what you need to support the Expeditionary Force with ground attack. So that's what I'm doing, and it does get quite complicated. The other thing that you have to then think about is aircraft which are in a drawdown phase. So whilst most of the types will have an OCU or spares, for the Mirage 2000, very much in the drawdown phase, they are strike specialists now because whilst they can do air combat, they don't really cut it with some of the more modern types like the Mantellas, and they would be vulnerable, say, against the MiG-31s of Marmatia or the Su-35s of, say, Russia. So you then look at expanding squadrons from the normal 9 to, say, 18, but retaining strike air anti-ship specialists on the eastern side and the Reunion Islands, which will be blue and blue. So it does get quite complicated very quickly, but it's a good way of really thinking through the problems. And in this case, they've got a lot more spare aircraft because they're in a drawdown phase to retirement. And airframes, as they get older, require more maintenance, which means that you need to have more spares available to backfill the squadrons. So it's not a simple job. And even within a newer aircraft, like the Mantellas, you're still going to have aircraft which are going in for deep maintenance. So that's where the OCU and the spares come in, and that makes up part of your operational numbers. So within the Mantella wing, you've got 2 main squadrons on the northern side, 1 squadron on the eastern side. If one of these aircraft needs to go into deep maintenance or go back to Lockheed, then you need to have the spares to pull from the OCU. And that's why you've got, say, 36 aircraft overall in service. But actually, when you think about it, that only gives you 27 operational, and then you're pulling from the spares for maintenance time. So there's a lot of planning which goes in, and this is just fighter command. And that's what I'm doing basically. So the J-10s, whilst the J-10 is perfectly capable for the air-to-air role, it is really one of my multi-role strike aircraft. And so I've got super squadrons of 18 aircraft supporting the Malagasy Expeditionary Force, the northern sector, and then I'll have an anti-ship squadron supporting the eastern section, with 54 overall aircraft and then the spares. So that's what I'm working on at the minute, and this is just fighter command. So I hope it gives an idea of what I'm up to, and just how complex actually running a 1 in 72nd what if aircraft Air Force is, and actually how quite a big fleet gets dissipated very quickly when you factor in operational requirements. Now if you're factoring visits to Red Flag, exercises away, you can see that basically as you think about the training syllabus, resources get dissipated pretty quickly, and actually the core mission of something like the Hawk 129 means that they will be forward based in the Western and Malagasy Expeditionary Force. Yes, they'll have hubs on the Malagasy main island, but they will operate in detachments or as squadrons away from Madagascar. So yeah, I hope that has given you a flavour of what I'm working on. Take care everyone, and I'll keep working on this. Now look, the great thing as a model builder is when you start doing this, you can start looking at different schemes. You can start looking at different squadron markings. So for example, we've got the cat running with bomb squadron here. We've got the EEV squadron here. And then it helps me with my aircraft markings, because even within a squadron, so if we look at here, the crocodile squadron, we've got Val, so aircraft number V, they're all given a alphanumeric letter, and then there's a squadron marking, so that's how they tell which aircraft belongs to which squadron. The maximum they can obviously have is 26. They don't all run consecutively to confuse the enemy. For example, whilst you've only got 9 in the Charmander squadron, you've got S for Sophia. And yeah, so that's how I do it, and then that gives me my sort of desire to build more aircraft, unfortunately, and to make them in different schemes, and that's what I'll be working on. Ta-ra!